MX records define mail servers. It uses this syntax. The domain name field defines the domain for which this record will define the mail server. Similar to an NS record, if we leave this field empty, the record will inherit its value from the previous record's name field. The TTL field defines the maximum time resolver systems can cache this record. If we leave this field empty, the record uses the TTL directive's value. In this example zone file, we have two MX records. In the first record, we define this field's value. In the second record, we left this field empty. Because of this, the first record will use the defined value. The second record will use the TTL directive's value. The class field defines the class of the record. The resource type field defines the record type. The preference field defines the priority of mail servers. If you configure multiple mail servers, you can use this field to define the order in which they should be used. You can use any value between 0 and 96,535. In order, a lower value has higher priority than a higher value. Typically, administrators use values in multiples of 10. They use the value 10 for the most preferred mail server, 20 for the second most preferred mail server, and so on. This method allows them to add additional MX records without changing the existing order. In this example, we use this field to configure the mail server mail.example.com as the main mail server and the mail server mail.example.net as the backup mail server. To define mail.example.com as the main mail server, we use the value 10, which is the lowest in the configured priority order. We used value 20 for mail.example.net to define it as the backup mail server. The mail server field defines the email server for the domain we configure in the domain name field. In this example, we configured two mail servers mail.example.com and mail.example.net for the domain example.com. We configured mail.example.com as the primary mail server and mail.example.net as the backup mail server. Our primary mail server is available within the domain. Our backup mail server is available in the external domain. With this configuration, if the primary mail server fails, the backup mail server will receive mail for the domain and forward them to the primary mail server as soon as it will come online again. If the mail server is available within the domain, we also need to add a host record for it. For example, this mail server is available inside the domain. Therefore, we need to add a host record for it. If the mail server is available outside the domain, we do not need to add a host record for that in the zone file of this domain. We need to add a host record for it in the zone file of that domain. In our example, we do not need to add a host record for mail.example.net in the zone file of the example.com domain. We need to add a host record for mail.example.net in the zone file of the example.net domain. We need to create host records of all resources available within the domain in the domain's zone file. If a resource is available in the external, parent, and child domains, we don't need to add that resource's host record in the domain's zone file. There is only one exception to this rule. We need to add a host record for the child domain's nameserver record. In this domain tree, we have 3 domains in one branch and 2 domains in another branch. The example domain is the parent of the XYZ domain and child of the CALM domain. We need to create host records for these resources in the zone file of this domain. We will create host records for these resources in the zone file of this domain. Same way, for these resources, we will create host records in the zone file of this domain. Since the XYZ domain is the child domain of the example domain, we need to create a host record for the XYZ domain's nameserver in the example domain's zone file. Similarly, we need to create host records for all nameservers in their parent domain's zone files. Besides nameserver records, we don't need to add host records of any domain in its parent domain's zone file. To add a host record, we use the following syntax. The name field defines the name of the host or service whose IP address we want to make publicly accessible. If we use a relative name here, DNS automatically converts it into a fully qualified domain name by adding the origin directive's value to it. The TTL field defines how long other name servers and resolver systems can cache this record. The class field defines the class type of this record. The resource record type field defines the type of record. The A record maps an IP4 address with the name of a host or a service. The quad A record maps an IP6 address with the name of a host or a service. The IP address field defines the IP address we want to map with the name defined in the name field. We can map multiple IP addresses with the same name. This feature is used when we run the same service on multiple hosts. If the same service is available on multiple hosts, we need to map their IP addresses with the service name. For example, if we configure the same web service on 3 hosts for backup and redundancy purposes, we need to map all 3 hosts' IP addresses with the service name. If we map multiple IP addresses with the same name, DNS provides an IP address for the name in a round-robin or random order. You can define this order by configuration directives. We can also map multiple names with a single IP address. You can use this feature when you run more than one service on the same host. For example, if you have a small website and use only a few email addresses for management and communication purposes, you can run the mail, web, and FTP services on the same server. This setup allows you to save the cost of additional servers. Let us understand this feature through our example. Suppose we configure the mail, web, and FTP services on a single server whose IP address is 192.168.0.2. In this situation, we need to map these services with the IP address 192.168.0.2. The CNAME resource record type assigns an alias name to the name of an existing host or a service. The alias name field defines the name you want to use for the existing name defined in the canonical name field. The canonical name field defines the actual name which you want to access by an alias name defined in the alias name field. This record type is used when you want to access a service from another name or hide your internal network structure from external users. Let's understand it through our example. Suppose we run the web service on a host called my web server. In this situation, we can map the name www with the name my web server. After this, DNS will translate the name www into the IP address of my web server. Users will access the web service running on the IP address of my web server by using the name www. Usually, administrators configure a web server to serve websites with and without the www. This setup needs a CNAME record in the zone file for the web service. To achieve this goal, you need to add a host record for the domain name and then you need to configure the www as the alias name for the domain name. A zone file only translates names into IP addresses. It does not run or provide any other service. If you add an alias name for a service, you also need to configure that service to respond to both canonical and alias names. In this example, you also need to configure the web server to respond on both names www.example.com and example.com. That's all for this video. If you have any suggestions, comments, or feedback about this video, please share them with us in the comment section given below.